You all having a good afternoon? I love that this conference is focusing on the future because I've always been fascinated by the future. Here's me being fascinated by the future. When I was 13, I loved Star Trek, The Next Generation. That's how old I am. And I somehow I went to a convention and tried to buy a uniform, but they were really expensive. So instead, I bought a pattern, brought it home to my mom, and informed her that she was going to be sewing me this uniform, which she very kindly did. If you look closely at this picture, you can see how I used my limited funds resourcefully. I had a tricorder, that's the little device that I'm holding, made out of a 2x4 and a Sharpie pen and a door hinge. And my gun that I'm holding, that's on Star Trek, that's called a phaser. In this photo, it's called Speed Stick deodorant. So you make do with what you have, and as HR professionals, we all know that, right? Fortunately, I grew out of it. I don't go in for that silliness anymore. The thing that I love about Star Trek is its hopeful vision. The Starship Enterprise is traveling the galaxy, seeking out new worlds, boldly going where no one has gone before. And its vision of the technology that's capable always excited me, the vision of what was possible. And what's been interesting in the last several decades, Star Trek initially came out in the 1960s, and technologies that we expected to take hundreds of years are becoming possibilities today. The captain of the Enterprise used to be able to stand on the bridge and say, "Computer, give me a background on this alien species," or anything else he wanted to ask. And now I can do that from any room in my house with devices like Alexa, or Siri, or Google Home. We can ask really important questions. Wait a minute. That's not the right question. Let's try another one. Alexa, what will the future of work look like? Oh, I guess we're in the right place to learn about the future of work then. I'd love to hear, we've been talking about this all day. What are some of the trends or things that are on your mind about the future of work? Go ahead and just shout some out. What's on your mind about the future of work? AI, yep. What else? Dwindling workforce, so challenges with staffing. Equity, that's a big one. We just heard from Katie some really important information around that. Will your employees actually show up tomorrow? Okay, that's one I hadn't anticipated, but that could be a challenge for some as well. What else? The decline in trades. Yeah, so industry shifts. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always love about HR conferences is that we have so much in common, but because we all come from such different organizations, it always shows up in different ways, right? I love looking at everyone's little badge to see, or your ribbon, to see what industry are you in. Many of you are HR departments of one. Let's have a hand for our HR departments of one. That is not an easy job. So even though there are these broader trends that I'm going to talk about here, I realize that those show up in different ways. But we are at a really pivotal moment. As people and culture leaders, we're in the midst of this transformation, and some of you mentioned these themes. We're at a point where we know that AI is going to have an impact on our work. Nicole and Megan talked about this earlier, some of the themes and things to watch out for with AI, some practical ways to be able to experiment with it and play with it and use it. I asked AI for input on my talk today. I recorded it, had AI transcribe it, and then I said, give me some public speaking tips. And it said, you talk too fast, slow down. So this is my signal to take a breath, slow down. The reality is we don't know the full extent of what AI is going to do to change our work, our lives, and the world. We're dealing with dispersed workforces. Whether we've returned to the office, whether we're in the process of returning to the office, whether our workforce is remote or hybrid, or even just has multiple locations, all of us, every HR leader that I talk to in coaching or with my leadership development clients, we're all thinking about how can we help people better connect and stay engaged across multiple locations. That's an AI photo, by the way. A lot of these are AI generated. I forgot to put the little, if you go there, it says in the very, very small print, make sure you tell people it's AI generated. So this is your official notice that some of these images are AI generated. For the first time in history, there are 5 generations in the workplace. This brings up lots of new issues, right? How do we ensure communications for people with very different styles and expectations? How do we create programs and benefits and a culture that meets the needs of very different populations? And this is just one aspect of the diversity in our workforce that we need to take into account. And of course, employees are expecting more and more companies to be socially engaged. Now, I know this is shifting, right? In 2020, there was a huge shift towards being socially engaged. A lot of us moved in that direction. Now, many of us are seeing a swing in the opposite direction. We're seeing a lot of political pressure around things like DEI. But my belief is that this need is not going to change. The specific where the pendulum is on a particular day, the issues that employees are asking about may be different. But organizations are ultimately going to have to evolve to understand how they're going to be socially engaged, because employees are going to demand it on everything from climate change to diversity, equity, and inclusion, reproductive health, and dozens of other issues. So we've got an easy job, right? Just a couple of small little trends shaping the future of our work. If that weren't enough, that the world is shifting around us, our roles are changing as well. Our roles as HR leaders are getting broader. Gartner released a report last year that called the expansion of HR, they said we're becoming more catalysts and conveners. And what that meant to me was that we're moving beyond the traditional space of HR and trying to bring people together to solve business problems across the organization. Because that's one of the things we're really good at, right? We're good at bringing people together. We're good at relationships. And finally, we've got that strategic seat at the table. Many of us do. Some of us I know are still struggling. But we have an opportunity to have a broader impact and bring people together in the organizations to work on business problems outside of just the traditional people space. At the same time, our roles are becoming deeper, more embedded in the employee experience, not in just their work, but in their lives. Now, this has always been true to an extent, but it really is increasing. The role we have and the decisions we make around things like workplace location, things that influence work-life balance, equity, inclusion, and belonging, mental health resources, all of these really go deeply to the experience of an individual's life. All this adds up to a situation where we're at a moment in time where things are in flux, big things are happening, and we have an opportunity to shape them. And as our roles expand, that adds up to a situation where we have tremendous impact. Now, I know it may not feel like that for everyone on a day-to-day basis. This is kind of taking a 30,000-foot view. Often on a day-to-day basis, we're just solving the problems right in front of us. We're making the best decisions we can for our organization. We're taking into account our organization's values, our organization's strategy, the needs of our founders and leadership teams. But as we're collectively making these decisions, especially in these big areas like AI and social engagement, what we're doing about climate change, all these issues that are global, collectively, we are shaping the future. So whether you know it or not, you are actually having an impact on these trends. And that means that collectively, we have a choice about what kind of future we're going to create. One of the things I loved about Star Trek was that its vision of the future was positive and hopeful. The creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, envisioned a world where need was a thing of the past. They no longer used money because they were able to meet everyone's needs. He also felt really strongly that technology would advance, but it needed to be in the background supporting people. I thought of what Nicole and Megan said about the human in the loop, right? Having a humanized approach to technology and AI. That was something that I loved about Star Trek. And of course, Star Trek was really a groundbreaking franchise in representation. In the 1960s, there were not a lot of people of color represented on network television. I guess back then it was only network television. There was no other option. But Gene Roddenberry insisted on showing a cast and a crew of the Enterprise that represented all walks of humanity. Nichelle Nichols played Lieutenant Uhura, a black communications specialist. George Takei played Lieutenant Sulu, the helmsman. And they even had a Russian. Now, back in the Cold War, that was a big deal. It was very intentional to say, we're moving beyond these divisions amongst ourselves and we're coming together as one. So Walter Koenig played Ensign Chekhov, that was the Russian navigator. But in the last few decades, I've seen a real shift. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, if you haven't already guessed from my photos of me as a kid. I read and watch all kinds of sci-fi. And in the last decade or so, there's been a real shift in a lot of the stories we tell about the future, from this positive future to a more dystopian view. You've probably seen examples of this, even if you're not particularly a sci-fi fan. Think about the movie WALL-E, right? WALL-E's alone on the Earth because we've trashed it. And all that's left is the garbage to be accumulated, and humans have taken off. Now, there's a positive ending, obviously. But it's a vision where we don't solve our problems. There's another movie, a little less well-known, called Elysium, with Matt Damon, where income inequality has gotten so bad that the rich have gone to a big fancy spaceship, and they live up there in luxury, and people who are poor or who are disadvantaged for any other reason are left to scrounge on an Earth that has been ravaged by climate change. And a little closer to home, how many of you have seen the show Severance on Apple Plus? Handful of you. Now, if you don't have Apple Plus, my secret is pay for 1 month, watch all the shows, and then cancel it. So save up until there's a few shows you want to watch, but Severance is an interesting one. I'm oversimplifying, but Severance is about a workplace where when people go in, their brains, their minds are actually separated. So their self at work has no information or knowledge about who they are outside of work, and their outside of work personality has no idea what they do at work. And it explores the intricacies and consequences of that. None of these are particularly hopeful or positive visions of the future, and the list goes on. The Hunger Games, A Handmaid's Tale, Westworld. Now, I don't think the robots are about to come take over Portland just yet, although you never know. But I do think we're at a moment where we have an interesting choice that we're contributing to. We have a choice between a future that is potentially dehumanizing and a human future. And you've heard it all day today. We've talked about, it's almost become a cliche that we need to put the human back in human resources, but I don't think we can say it enough. Because the risks of these trends are potentially dehumanizing. If our companies don't implement AI in thoughtful ways, we risk a future that's dehumanizing. If we don't invest sufficiently in equity, belonging, inclusion, accessibility, mental health, we risk inadvertently creating a future that's dehumanizing. And if we don't ensure that our companies do their part to combat climate change and create sustainable environmental practices, we're risking a future that's dehumanizing. Now, obviously, all of us want to take the right path, literally and figuratively. But what does that take? It can feel like a lot. I know I'm talking at a big, big picture here, and you're looking for practices and how can we improve our work. And I promise I will get to some practical applications. But I want to start by talking about this because I do think it's important to understand the big picture. And I think in looking at that big picture, one of the advantages in helping us choose the right path here, it's not even choosing. We know which path we want to go on. It's that momentum may inadvertently carry us towards the path we don't want to go down. So what is the shift that we can make in ourselves, in our organizations, in our communities that will help us stay on the path we want to be on? To understand how to impact that future, we have to first look to the past. Since ancient times, we've understood that there are two very broad sides of the human mind. Ancient Greek philosophers called it mythos and logos, or mystical thinking and logical thinking. In Chinese philosophy, it's called yin and yang, active, light principle, dark, passive principle. And modern neuroscience has confirmed that these differences are actually hardwired into our brains. Now, we've probably all heard, okay, left-brained people are logical and right-brained people are creative. That is much oversimplified, and neuroscience has really debunked that. All of us use our whole brain. None of us are asleep on one's, I shouldn't say that. Some people do have brain issues, so I want to acknowledge that. But for the most part, we are all wired to use our entire brain. But the sides of our brain, and really it's beyond just the brain, it's two sides of our being and our mind, do have different functions that work together. On one hand, we have the focused mind. That part of us is really good at breaking things down, understanding them in pieces so that we can understand how things work. The other side of us, what I call the holistic mind, is really good at looking at the big picture, understanding the connections between things and making creative leaps. It's more associated with intuition and emotion. But again, these are meant to work together. We're at our best when we can focus in, break things into pieces, analyze and understand them, and then put them in context and understand the broader implications. And this balance has been basically represented in human culture throughout human history. But about 500 years ago in Europe, something happened that started to upset this balance. And what I want to share now is the cultural implications. So this isn't necessarily at an individual level. Individually, we're always using both of these. But a culture can also reflect this divide. And our modern business culture, which kind of evolved out of the dominant European culture, has shown a bit of a split. So how did it start? It's all this guy's fault. Not really, but he's partly to blame. This is René Descartes, a French philosopher who was part of the Age of Enlightenment in Europe. He's most famous for this phrase, "I think, therefore I am." And what this represents is a shift that started with the Enlightenment and with Descartes and his fellow philosophers in Europe about starting to not just value logic and rationality, but overvalue it in relation to things like emotion and intuition. Now, at the time, this was seen as an advancement because a lot of the ways that that emotional, intuitive mind showed up was in superstition and things that were happening during the Dark Ages. So being able to understand and utilize the benefits of logic and rationality was an advancement. It's led to things like improvements in healthcare, advances in technology and infrastructure, and even the space age and information age, to the point where we all now have a supercomputer in our pockets. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the science that was enabled by the Enlightenment, which led to capitalism, which led to the Industrial Revolution. That's sort of been the trail of this shift in modern culture. But there's a dark side to this too. I'm sure you can think of lots of examples historically where there's been negative impacts of these things. But we're at a point today where a lot of these are coming to the surface. Because the logical, rational mind is better at looking at things in pieces, breaking things down, it is not good at thinking about the collective good, and it's not good at long-term, broad context consideration. And so that's where we see things that once were huge innovations like technology and capitalism are resulting in things like climate change, where we're seeing flooding and wildfires and storms all over the world. We're seeing increased income inequality, poverty, and hunger. And we're seeing increased polarization and violence in many parts of the world. Now, I'm not painting this picture to depress everybody, right? I'm sharing this because the stakes are high. And I think we as people and culture leaders are uniquely positioned to help shape this future. Because we are at that intersection of influence and being part of the trends that shape everyone's day-to-day lives, right? Even though we're focused on work, the workplace is where most of us spend most of our time. And so the way that we influence and shape the workplace will shape the world and shape people's lives in general. So, just to summarize, the way that I think about these two parts of ourselves, and then I'll show how this kind of shows up in organizations, is that one part of us looks at the tree and sees the tree. It's good at separating, analyzing, and thinking about it in a cogitating way. So it sees what's right in front of it. It sees the tree. It's able to understand things like photosynthesis. It's able to come up with different uses for the wood of a tree. But in order to take that path towards the more human future, we need to go deeper. We need to look beneath the surface and understand the roots of the tree. What's going on underneath there? Is it healthy? Is it connected to other things? What's going on? We need to think about things like meaning, connecting, co-creating. And that really is the work that I do. My company is called Deeper Work, and it's all about going deeper. And so I work with leaders individually. I work with a lot of HR and DEI leaders as coaching clients, and I also do leadership development programs inside of companies to really find practical ways to go deeper, right? And I'll be honest, my interest in this started because I benefited a lot from my own spiritual journey. It was personal, and I'm not going to go too much into that, but that side of us, the spiritual side or the holistic side, is where that sense of meaning lies. My definition of spirituality is whatever is most deeply meaningful to you. And I was looking for ways, it felt like there was something true and important there that would have value if we brought it more into the business sphere. But my biggest fear was I'd say that out loud and people would say, that's just woo-woo crap, right? And so I've spent the last 10 or 15 years really doing the research and looking at experience for what are ways that we can appropriately and inclusively bring these more holistic, more deeper practices into the workplace. All right, that's the background. I'm going to now kind of go through each of these areas, meaning, connecting, and co-creating, and give you some examples of what this might look like in a work context. I'm not going to go super deep into any of them, but I'll give you some background and example, and then I'll give you a chance as we go through to think about how you might implement this in your own life. We'll look at the individual level, the interpersonal level, and the organizational level. I don't have a handout, but as we go through and I share these practices, I encourage you, I'm going to pause and ask you to write down ideas. So hopefully you'll walk away with your own set of bullet points around what you're taking away. There may be things that don't resonate with you. So as they say, take what you like and leave the rest. But let's start with meaning. As HR leaders, we're used to talking about meaning, but we talk about it in collective and abstract ways. We talk about the importance of meaningful work as a concept. We talk about it being important in employee engagement. And we talk about the meaning inherent in the purpose and the values of our organization and helping align employees with that. But I'm willing to bet most of us don't think often enough about our own individual sense of meaning. I often do an exercise in workshops with managers, leaders, all kinds of different people that helps them think about a sense of meaning. And inevitably, someone comes up to me afterwards and said, that was amazing. Even though it was only 5 minutes, I just have not thought about what was really meaningful to me. And starting with the self is also really important. So before we even get into what this looks like in a workplace, I'm going to ask you to think about your own self and your own sense of meaning. And in reality, that use of self is a tool that we have as organizational leaders. I remember in my OD classes, they talked about the use of self. I don't know what happened to the color there. But use of self is the conscious use of our whole being in the execution of our roles for effectiveness in whatever's showing up. Basically, what this means is that who we are is just as important, if not more important, than what we do. It's reclaiming that other side of ourselves and finding ways to be authentic in our work. So I want to share an activity with you. This is actually the one that I do with leaders, so feel free to steal it. I call it finding meaning in a moment. There's 2 ways to do this. Some people like one or the other, so I was trying to be flexible. The first way is grab a piece of scratch paper or grab a phone or device, something that you can write with, and follow along as I ask these questions by writing things down. Your other option is to treat this as a guided meditation. So get comfortable in your chair. If you want to, close your eyes and just hold the answers to the questions I ask in your mind's eye. So whichever way you're doing this, either write down or hold in your mind's eye a meaningful moment in the last few weeks. What was a time in the last few weeks that felt meaningful to you? Doesn't have to be life-changing, just something that stands out as meaningful. Take a moment to think about a particular moment that was meaningful to you. And then ask yourself why. Why was that moment so meaningful to me? If you're writing, jot down the answer that comes to you. Or you can listen for the answer in your own intuition and hold that answer in your head. Why was that moment so meaningful to you? Once you have an answer, ask again to that answer. Why was that so meaningful? Whatever the first answer is that you got, ask why again to go a layer deeper. Why was that so meaningful? What was important about that? Jot down your answer or hold your answer in your mind. And then once again, whatever that answer is, ask why one more time, one layer deeper. Why was that meaningful to you? And then on our last time, I'm going to encourage you to see if you can get it down to one word that really symbolizes this. Why was that important to you? What's one word that really symbolizes what was meaningful about that for you? If you're having trouble, I know I'm not giving you a lot of time, notice what word pops into your head. What's the word that pops into your head right now that represents that meaningful experience for you? Write that down for yourself or just hold it in your mind. All right. So what I'd like you to do now is, oops, that was the wrong button. Log into Slido. We'll skip this one. Whoops, hold on. Please bear with me. Just shout out, if you're comfortable shouting out, what are some of your words? Change. Oh, I heard them all at once. Validation. Sorry? Love, connection, service, gratitude, trust. Yeah, so that was a very short exercise, right? And you all got to some really deep places. So we're gonna come back to this in a moment. But part of what I wanted to demonstrate here is that it's really quick. We just don't take the time to do it, right? I was talking to Nikki earlier about how we know the things we have to do, we don't take the time for it. So just really reinforcing that it starts with us, right? It starts with us getting centered in our own meaning, and from that we can have an impact on others by using exercises like this, or even just in how we show up. We'll skip that. All right, so the next area, that's sort of the individual level, right? If we move to connecting, we know that this is important. We understand the value of relationships in connecting. I know this is a little hard to read. It says, individuals thrive when they form meaningful relationships, and meaningful relationships are formed and sustained through high-quality conversations. That's a quote from Chief Talent Officer. And this might seem like duh, right? But that fact around conversations, I think, is really important. That's why we have opportunities to break out and chat with each other here today. And the takeaway for me is the high-quality conversations. I can't tell you as an L&D leader how many times I've had icebreakers, right? I have a list a mile long of icebreakers I can use. And most of those are pretty surface level, right? And what I've started to do is to think about how can we bring deeper meaning and higher quality into these conversations. So as just a demonstration, what I'd like to have you do is share something that matters to you with a person at your table. So this will just be a pair conversation. What I'll have you do in a moment, but not yet, is find a partner, and I'm going to ask you to do two things with your partner. One is share the word that you came up with, maybe a brief description of why it came up for you, if you're comfortable. And then number two, I want you to share with your partner, how would you like to see more of that word in your work in life? So the word that usually comes up for me when I do this exercise is joy. So what I would share with my partner is joy, what that means to me, and then how would I like to see more joy show up in my work in life? Make sense? Okay. I'll give you about 3 minutes, so a minute and a half each, so keep it quick, but go ahead and find a partner, share your word, and how you'd like to see more of it in your work in life. So again, really just a taste of this, right? Obviously, you could go a lot further with this. One of the activities that I often do with employees that both helps them get to know each other better, especially across teams that are now dispersed, but also that has an inclusion and equity component. I do an exercise called Treasure Box. And I ask every employee that's participating to find 3 to 5 items from their home that represent their history, heritage, or identity. And I give them a list of suggestions to kind of prompt things. And then find a cute little box to bring it in. And then we go around the room and share. And it's really interesting because I don't give too much guidance. I say bring whatever's important to you, but you learn a lot about what's important to them and who they are. So people will talk about things they may not have talked about at work before in terms of religion, in terms of family. I always bring, of course, my little Star Trek badge, because everyone has to know that I'm a Star Trek fan wherever I go. But I also bring my antidepressant bottle, because I think it's important to talk about mental health. And there's not a lot of opportunities I get to talk about that. So it's a way that I share something that's important to me. It's been part of my family's history and family journey. So there's plenty of other similar activities out there that help do that. So I think finding ways to have these more meaningful conversations is another thing that we can do to continue down this path. All right, It wouldn't be a strategic management conference if I didn't talk about the organizational level, right? What I want to talk about at the organization level is the idea of co-creating. And where's Katie? Is Katie still in here? Maybe she stepped out. She did a great job of teeing this up for me because she talked about the importance of getting employees together and helping them participate in policy. And that's really what I'm talking about here, is getting more opportunities for everyone to participate. I love this old proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I'm going to share a couple of ways that we can do this in our own organizations in different ways. The first one is participative strategy. Similar to what Katie was talking about, this basically means getting more people in the room when you're doing the strategy. Traditionally, strategy is a top-down exercise. The C-suite will decide, usually with the board, what the company-level strategy is going to be. We talk a lot about cascading, right? I used to be in internal comms, and a lot of it was cascading. That doesn't always work, right? That's why we have so much trouble getting buy-in, because we're trying to convince people to care about something they had no role in creating. And oftentimes, it doesn't consider the things that maybe the people on the front lines know that the people on the top may not be aware of. So participative strategy is really just a way of getting people involved in the initial process. I'll share a couple of examples of how I've seen this work well. One is that at a previous company, I can't take credit for this, they were doing this before I was there, but they did what they called annual initiatives. And from the very beginning of the company, the senior leaders, the C-suite, would have a series of focus groups. We did this until we were about 1,000 employees. So they met with literally every employee, or at least every employee had an opportunity to talk with a senior leader in a small group. And they asked them, what do you think is important? They would have some prompts about what they thought was important, but they'd have a really open conversation. And each year they'd coalesce around 3 themes, they called them annual initiatives, that kind of guided the strategy. And it really helped people feel like they were embedded in what the organization was doing. Another thing I've done was when I was leading the development of the people strategy a couple years ago, we did what we called research squads. So instead of just the HR leadership team doing the strategy, we actually took the whole HR team and split them up into small groups that we called research squads. And we assigned each of them a different task. Most of them were to gather feedback from a particular segment of the population. We divided it by leadership levels. So some interviewed senior leaders, some interviewed managers, some interviewed individual contributors. And then we also had a group that looked at internal data and external trends. So we got not only the input from all the different facets of the employee population, we also had a group that was looking at what are the trends that are going on that we should be aware of, what is the context of all the other data that we have in the organization. And not only did it give us a much richer pool to be able to build our people strategy from, the HR team all had a very direct role in shaping it. Now, of course, as the people leadership team, we went away and made some choices and brought it back, but they had a very real role. It wasn't just a lip service kind of thing. The employees did have a role in shaping this. Now, the comment that I often hear when I talk about participative strategy is like, oh, it's going to slow things down, it's so much more work. But research actually shows that it can speed up the process. It can reduce politics and resistance. Again, if people are involved from the beginning, you're not going to have to do the hard work of buy-in at the end. And even when people disagree, they at least feel heard. They at least had an opportunity. And the research also found that it's just as bold as any other approach. So there really are not very many drawbacks. So take just a moment on your own. You don't need to share this with your partner, but I'll give you just a minute or so and think about, is there an area in your work, in your organization, where you'd like to experiment with being a little bit more participative in your strategic planning process? Take just a moment to do that on your own. The next practice I want to share is related. It's inclusive decision making. The difference is that strategic planning usually happens once a year, right? Maybe there are times where we come back to it, but it's sort of an annual process, and it's easier to kind of have a process around including people. Inclusive decision making is about all the other decisions we make throughout the year, throughout the day. How are we making sure that people are represented in the room? There's research that shows that when people are included in decision making, when you have more diverse perspectives, the decisions we make are better. They're 2 times faster. They're 60% better, and I think one that we would all like, it takes half as many meetings when you have an inclusive group making those decisions. Now this is challenging, right? Because what does it mean to have inclusive decision making? How do we ensure it? But what I would leave you with is a simple reminder to carry into every conversation you're in, every plan that you're part of, every meeting that you're in. Asking yourself this: what perspectives are not being represented? Whatever this decision-making process is, what perspectives are not being represented? At the very least, becoming more aware of it yourself and understanding that, right, is a first step. In some cases, depending on your relationships and who else is there, you may raise it to the room, right? What perspectives are not being represented? I had a colleague once who was a coach for the engineering team, and he had a practice of, on a flip chart, he would write at the beginning of certain meetings which perspectives are not currently in the room with us. And they'd brainstorm as a group. And often it was organizational categories, right? There are people from this team that are not involved, or sales isn't here, or so-and-so is usually in these meetings. And they'd leave that up to remind themselves that to think about what perspectives are not here. So it was a really helpful mental practice to get them to think outside of their own bubble. But we're also talking about diversity in the sense that we all think about it in terms of underrepresented and marginalized populations, right? That's a little bit more challenging. But the one practice I think that is helpful is shifting from allyship and mentorship to sponsorship. A couple years ago, this was a new term to me. I'd heard about allyship, I'd heard about mentorship, but I hadn't really heard about sponsorship. And I heard it and didn't know what it really meant until I found this article by Rosalind Chow that I really appreciated. And she uses this 4-step model to understand what sponsorship is and how we can do it. In its simple form, sponsorship is basically proactively identifying people or individuals from marginalized background and helping them counteract the systemic forces that are maybe preventing them from moving forward in an organization or in their career. And Rosalind Chow talks about these 4 steps. The first one is amplify. Amplifying the accomplishments of the people you're sponsoring or the person you're sponsoring. Again, it's beyond mentorship. Mentorship is really focused on working with the person directly, giving them advice, sharing your own business experience. Sponsorship goes beyond this to say, I want to make sure that you all recognize what this person's been doing. She's, maybe someone that, I even see this with not even necessarily marginalized backgrounds, but introverts, right? There was a woman on my team that I had to really help amplify her accomplishments because what people saw of her in meetings was that she was very withdrawn. And so being able to amplify her accomplishments was really helpful. Boost sounds pretty similar to amplify, but what it basically means is using your own credibility to support another person and bring them up alongside you, right? The example she uses is letters of recommendation, right? That may not come up in our work context very much, but it's an example of where we use our strong reputation, our privilege and power to lend to someone else, to say, I give kind of my, this sounds weird, but seal of approval to this person. And people out there trust that, right? If they know and trust us, then they will take our word that this person that we're sponsoring, they might give them a chance where they otherwise wouldn't have. And it can also help counteract bias in performance evaluations, right? Which as much as we may try, that does show up. And so if we're sponsoring people and encouraging people and saying, trust me, you're not gonna regret working with this person, that can go a long way. Connect is just what it sounds like, introducing them to contacts, bringing them to events. All of this is about being intentional, right? And finally, defending. This is the hardest one. But I see this a lot, right? There are rooms that I've been in, even, we'll be in a performance calibration conversation. And people will say things about certain people, and it will be apparent to me, because I think about this all the time, that person is from a marginalized community, and that I know maybe that there are some equity or access issues, but there are barriers there, right? And being able to defend that person and counteract the narrative that's being put out there about, oh, I don't like this person, or they're not qualified, or whatever, right? Now, I'm not saying ignore the factual situation, but a lot of this is implicit, right? And so being able to, when appropriate, take action and defend, or at least question those conversations of, hey, are we really talking about all the different pieces here? I have seen this person do X, Y, Z, and provide that counter narrative. All right, so at this point, you might be thinking, no, I have even more to do. I gave you a bunch of steps. Other speakers have given you steps. You probably have notes. You've got handouts. You've got an app to look at. Every time I go to a conference, I go home feeling inspired and completely overwhelmed. I have a list of 900 things to do, and then, oh, by the way, all your emails stacked up while you were out yesterday, right? Anyone relate to that? So the last practice is one you've all heard before, but you need to hear again, self-care for yourself. This goes back to that mind difference, right? Part of that over-focus on the rational, logical mind shows up as perfectionism and thinking that work and getting things done, results are more important than our health and our well-being. Now, we are the ones, in many cases, that are out there advocating for our people's well-being. We are the ones on the front line saying that these things are important. But if I know anything about HR people, and I've been one for a while, we're out there supporting everybody else. We forget to support us, right? I'm sure you've heard this metaphor before, but you have to put your own mask on, own oxygen mask on before you put on others. So this is your reminder that you matter too. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to take a lot of effort. Even these great breaks that Tiffany's doing, right, of getting up and moving and breathing are examples of things that are very simple to do. So that's your reminder. I'm also just going to share one practice that works for me. You're welcome to adopt it. It may not work for you. Something else may be better for you. But I call this the 4 R's meditation. I was talking to Nikki a bit right before this, and she was sharing that she sometimes found it challenging to do these things on her own. Like when someone's leading it, it's great, but when I try to go do it on my own, it's hard. And what I shared is that for me, it helps to have a mental focus. So what I like about this meditation is there's clear things. You don't have to clear your mind and think about nothing. I think that's impossible, by the way. You can focus on each of these steps, and it gives your mind something to do. And if you get distracted, just come back to the word. So I'm going to take just a minute to walk you through this. You're welcome to close your eyes and participate if you want. If you're not comfortable, that's fine as well. But if you'd like, go ahead and get in a comfortable position in your chair and close your eyes. And start just by noticing your breathing. There's no need to breathe in any special way. Just notice the natural rhythm and flow of your breath. Allow your body to relax. But at the same time, since it's afternoon, if you're feeling sleepy, I would say maybe gently sit up straight. That will help you stay relaxed without falling asleep. But focus your mind on that word and that intention to relax. And just feel that intention flowing through your body, letting your body relax. Notice if there are any places of pain that just need acknowledgement. You may not do anything about them, but just acknowledge. If there's an area of tension that feels like it can be released, allow it to just gently release that tension from those tight places in the body. And just allow your spirit, your emotions to relax and be present in this moment. And staying relaxed but alert, move into our next phase and hold in mind the word release. And allow yourself to let go of anything that's not serving you right now. If you have racing thoughts or worries, see if you can release those as best you can. It may help you to imagine taking a mental to-do list and setting it aside. You can come back to it, it's still there. Or there may be things that it's too hard to release. We just can't get there in our own minds. That's okay. Imagine yourself relaxing your grip, loosening your grip on those things, and just holding them a little more lightly. Whatever you're able to do in this moment is just right for you. There's no perfect way to do this. Just allow yourself to release as much as feels right to you in this moment. And then bring the word recenter into your mind's eye and focus on that word and allow yourself to recenter. You can do that however feels comfortable to you. I often imagine my attention moving inward into the core of my body, moving deeper and deeper into the center of who I am. Can also be feeling centered in this time, in this space, being present in the moment, being centered in who you are. Again, doing as much as is comfortable and appropriate for you right now. Whatever you're able to do is perfect. And once you're in that centered place, allow yourself to just rest there and be recentered. And from that place, bring to mind the word receive. And just allow yourself to receive whatever energy, ideas are there for you in this centered place. It may just be a feeling of peace or presence. It might be a sense of energy or gratitude. Whatever shows up, just allow yourself to really deeply receive it. It may be nothing. It may just be receiving the present moment as it is. Whatever you're experiencing is right for you. It's perfect in this moment. And as you're there, recentered and receiving, just notice if there's anything you want to take back with you from this process. Sometimes if I really kind of tap into a good, helpful feeling, I'll put my hand to my heart just to kind of take that back with me from this process. And when you're ready, go ahead and bring your attention back to your physical body, to this room. Wiggle your fingers and toes. Take a nice breath and open your eyes. So what I'll invite you now to do again is grab something to write with, piece of paper, your device, and write down one intention for how you're going to amp up your self-care. It might be a reminder of something you were already doing. You might be putting in place a new practice, but just take a moment now to think about something that you can do to invest in your own self-care. Okay, hopefully you got at least the beginning of an idea there. So we've talked about a lot as we've talked about this idea of going deeper and making the future more human. We talked about all the huge global trends that we're in the midst of. We talked about the expansion and deepening of our role as HR leaders. And we talked about the crossroads that we're at between creating a dehumanizing future and a more human future. We talked about the importance of grounding ourselves in our own personal meaning, as well as the power of sharing what matters with others. We talked about participative and inclusive processes, and we reminded ourselves about the importance of self-care. So what I want to do now is give you maybe 5 minutes with a partner or a trio, whoever you're there with, and think about what do you want to take back with you from everything that we've talked about here so far, maybe some of the things you wrote down along the way. What do you want to take back with you from this session as you go back into your life and work? So let's take 4 minutes and find a partner and share your thoughts. What will you want to take back with you from this session? I wish I could walk around and hear what all of you are saying. So I'm going to be around for the rest of the afternoon. So I'm curious to hear what y'all are talking about. Feel free to come up and share. I want to leave you with this quote because I think this brings together what we've been talking about today. The world doesn't change because business changes, society changes, or relationships change. It changes because we do. The world will change because of all of you. Thank you.